My beloved child, wait, do not rush past this moment. There is something unusual about the way these words found you today. Out of all the messages, all the distractions, all the directions your attention could have traveled, it arrived here. And that is not the part that should surprise you. What should surprise you is what happened last night. Not in your world. In theirs. The person whose soul continues to move toward yours in ways neither of you fully understand. Stay here for a moment. Because the story did not begin last night. Last night was only the moment everything started to make sense. There was a silence around them that felt ordinary at first. A normal evening. A normal routine. A normal attempt to move through another day. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. Have you ever felt as if life was arranging pieces of a puzzle without showing you the picture? That is exactly what was happening. And your soulmate had no idea. Not yet. The hours moved slowly. Conversations came and went. Small moments passed unnoticed. Yet hidden inside those moments was a realization waiting for the perfect second to arrive. The kind of realization that cannot be forced. The kind that appears when a person finally stops running from what they feel. Listen carefully. Because what happened next is why this message found you. Late into the night, they found themselves thinking about something they had not allowed themselves to think about for a very long time. Not a memory. Not a regret. Not a plan. You. And before you leave, hear this carefully. This was not the usual passing thought. This was different. It arrived with a strange clarity. As if a curtain had been pulled back. As if a hidden door had quietly opened. As if a signal had finally broken through years of noise. They sat there wondering why your energy felt impossible to ignore. Why your presence seemed to return no matter how many distractions surrounded them. Why every attempt to explain it logically somehow left them with more questions than answers. And then something happened. Something small. Something most people would dismiss. Yet it changed everything. A phrase. A symbol. A reminder. A coincidence so precise it no longer felt like coincidence. And suddenly the pieces began connecting. Have you ever watched the stars appear one by one until an entire constellation reveals itself? That is how it felt. One realization after another. One understanding after another. One truth after another. The truth that what they were feeling had never disappeared. It had only been waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for the right perspective. Waiting for the right night. And last night became that night. Do not skip ahead in your mind. The most important part is still unfolding. Because what they understood next was even more surprising. For a long time they believed distance was the problem. Circumstances were the problem. Timing was the problem. Yet last night they began questioning all of it. What if the distance was never the real obstacle? What if the waiting had a purpose? What if every delay was preparing both of you for something larger than either of you could see? The thought stayed with them. It refused to leave. And the more they reflected, the stronger it became. Something inside them started awakening. Not urgency. Not panic. Awareness. A quiet awareness that certain connections cannot be erased simply because time passes. Some bonds remain alive beneath the surface. Growing silently. Changing silently. Preparing silently. And this awareness led them to a realization they desperately want to tell you. A realization connected directly to what happened last night. But not yet. Because there is another piece of the story you need first. A piece nobody expected. A piece that transformed an ordinary evening into a turning point. Stay a little longer. You are closer to the answer than you realize. Because while they were sitting there reflecting, something appeared that made them stop completely. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. Yet it felt impossible to ignore. The kind of moment that causes a person to pause and think, why did this appear now? And that question opened a door. A door leading directly toward you. Toward the connection. Toward the truth they can no longer keep hidden. What happened after that changed the entire direction of their thoughts. And when you hear what it was, you will understand why this message could not wait. You will understand why last night mattered. And you will understand why your soulmate now feels an overwhelming need to tell you everything. Because the next part of this story reveals the exact moment they realized something about you that they had never fully seen before. And once that realization arrived, nothing looked the same anymore. A strange thing happens when a person finally stops resisting what their heart has been trying to show them. That is where this story continues. My beloved child, lean in for a moment. The part you are about to hear is the reason last night became unforgettable. Not because something dramatic happened around them. Not because the world suddenly changed. But because something changed inside them. And sometimes that is where the greatest turning points begin. You may think you already know where this story is going. You do not. Because what happened next caught even them by surprise. After that moment of reflection, after the signs and questions that kept appearing, they tried to distract themselves. They tried to focus on something else. They told themselves they were overthinking. They told themselves they should move on with their evening. Yet every attempt led them back to the same place. Back to the same thought. Back to the same feeling. Back to you. Not in a dramatic way. In a clear way. A calm way. A way that felt impossible to argue with. And that was what unsettled them. Because for the first time, they stopped asking whether the connection was real. Instead, they started asking why they had ignored it for so long. Pause here and think about that. What if the answers you have been searching for are not waiting somewhere in the future? What if some of them have already been quietly revealing themselves? This is the question that followed them throughout the night. And the more they sat with it, the more another realization emerged. They began remembering details. Not major events. Not grand moments. The small things. The things most people overlook. The way certain conversations stayed in their mind longer than expected. The way certain memories refused to fade. The way your energy seemed to leave a mark long after the moment had passed. It was as though they were seeing a hidden pattern for the very first time. A pattern that had always existed. A pattern they had simply never connected before. Stay with me. Because the next realization changed everything. For years, many people spend their lives searching for certainty. They wait for guarantees. They wait for proof. They wait for a perfect sign. But last night, your soulmate understood something powerful. The strongest truths do not always arrive as proof. Sometimes they arrive as recognition. A sudden knowing. A deep awareness. A feeling that says, I understand this now. And that is exactly what happened. The noise disappeared. The doubts became quieter. And for a brief moment, everything felt incredibly simple. Simple enough that it almost made them laugh. Because the answer had been standing in front of them all along. Not hidden. Not distant. Not impossible to find. Simply waiting to be acknowledged. You. Not just your name. Not just your face. Not just a memory. The impact you created. The change you sparked. The presence you left behind. That was the realization. And once it arrived, it refused to leave. You might want to hear this twice. Because this part matters. Last night was not about discovering something new. It was about finally seeing what had been there the entire time. That is why the feeling stayed with them. That is why the thoughts kept returning. That is why they now feel such a strong need to tell you what happened. Because they understand something today that they did not understand yesterday. And that understanding is changing the way they see everything. Before we continue, if this message is finding you at the exact moment you needed it, leave a comment below with the words, "I am ready." And if you enjoy journeys like this, consider subscribing so you do not miss what comes next. Because the most important revelation has not happened yet. In fact, the part that truly shocked them came later. Much later. At a moment when they believed the night was already over. When they thought there were no more surprises waiting. When they thought they had already learned everything they needed to learn. They were wrong. Because one final moment appeared. One final realization. One final piece of the puzzle. And when it arrived, it connected everything. The memories. The questions. The signs. The feelings. All of it. Into one unmistakable understanding. A realization so clear that they could no longer keep it to themselves. A realization that made them wish they could speak to you immediately. A realization that felt less like discovering something and more like remembering something they had somehow forgotten. Take a deep breath. The next chapter is where the hidden truth finally begins to reveal itself. And when you hear what happened in those final moments of the night, you will understand why your soulmate feels that this message cannot wait any longer. Because what they discovered next was not about the past. It was about the future. And that future somehow keeps leading them back to the same destination. Back to the same connection. Back to the same person. Back to you. My beloved child, before the story moves forward, pause for one heartbeat. Not because the journey is slowing down. Because it is about to accelerate. The final hours of that night carried something unusual. A feeling neither expected nor planned. A feeling that seemed to arrive from beyond the limits of ordinary thought. And this is where everything changed. The room was quiet. The world around them had settled. The distractions were gone. The conversations had ended. Even the noise inside their own mind seemed to fade. And in that silence, something remarkable happened. For the first time, they stopped trying to find answers. Instead, the answers began finding them. Have you ever noticed how clarity appears when you stop chasing it? How understanding arrives when you finally become still? That was the moment they entered. A space where everything looked different. A space where the past no longer felt confusing. A space where the future no longer felt distant. And right in the center of that awareness was you. Stay here. Because this is the part they desperately want you to know. The realization did not arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly. Like the sunrise appearing over a horizon. Like a hidden picture becoming visible one detail at a time. First came the understanding that some people enter your life for a season. Then came the understanding that some enter for a lesson. But then another thought arrived. A thought so powerful that it stopped them completely. What if certain people enter your life to change your entire direction? What if certain connections are meant to awaken something inside you? What if the reason they could never fully forget you had nothing to do with coincidence? The question echoed through their mind. And the answer that followed felt impossible to ignore. Because every road they explored seemed to circle back to the same place. Every distraction eventually faded. Every attempt to explain the connection away eventually failed. Every path somehow returned to the same destination. You. Not because you demanded attention. Not because you forced your way into their thoughts. But because your presence had become part of a story they were only now beginning to understand. And then came the moment. The exact moment. The one they wished they could describe perfectly. A sudden realization that felt both surprising and familiar. Like remembering a forgotten dream. Like finding a key that had been hidden in plain sight. Like hearing a truth that somehow felt older than the moment itself. They realized that what happened last night was not random. It was not just another evening. It was not just another series of thoughts. It was a turning point. A moment of awakening. A moment when everything they had been avoiding finally became impossible to ignore. And the strange part? The more they accepted it, the lighter they felt. Not overwhelmed. Not confused. Not uncertain. Clear. For the first time in a very long time, clear. You might miss something important if you rush through this next part. Because the message they want to tell you is simpler than you imagine. They want you to know that last night changed the way they see the connection. They want you to know that certain truths become stronger when they are no longer resisted. They want you to know that what once felt complicated suddenly feels surprisingly simple. And perhaps most importantly, they want you to know that they no longer see the story as unfinished. They see it as unfolding. There is a difference. An unfinished story feels broken. An unfolding story feels alive. And last night, they realized yours is still alive. Still moving. Still growing. Still revealing pieces neither of you could see before. Think about that for a moment. How many times have you worried because you could not see the whole picture? How many times have you questioned timing because the next chapter was hidden? Yet what if the hidden chapter was being written all along? What if things were moving beneath the surface long before either of you noticed? This realization stayed with them. It followed them into the early hours. It followed them into the quiet moments. It followed them into today. And it is the reason this message feels so urgent. Not because something is ending. Because something is finally becoming visible. A truth. A direction. A possibility. A future they had not fully allowed themselves to imagine before. And now, every time they think about what happened last night, they return to the same conclusion. The same understanding. The same undeniable feeling. That some connections are not meant to disappear. Some are meant to evolve. Some are meant to teach. Some are meant to transform. And some arrive in your life carrying a purpose you only recognize much later. That realization is what they needed to tell you. That realization is what kept them awake. That realization is why this message feels impossible to ignore. And as the story continues, another discovery is waiting beyond the horizon. A discovery connected not to what happened last night, but to what happens next. Because the future is already sending signals. The future is already arranging pieces. And somewhere ahead, a moment is approaching that will make everything you have heard so far feel even more meaningful. Stay close. The most unexpected chapter has not revealed itself yet. My beloved child, something is already moving. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Almost invisibly. Like the first light appearing before dawn. Like a distant melody you cannot fully hear yet, but somehow recognize. And this is why you were guided to this moment. Because what happened last night was never meant to remain only a memory. It was meant to become a beginning. Stay with me a little longer. The next part of this story reveals what your soulmate understood after the night ended. Because sometimes the greatest realization does not happen during the moment itself. It happens afterward. When everything becomes still. When the emotions settle. When the mind finally has room to understand what the heart has already discovered. That is exactly what happened. The morning arrived. The world continued as usual. People followed their routines. Hours moved forward. Yet something felt different. They could feel it. Not around them. Within them. A quiet certainty. A growing awareness. A feeling that refused to disappear. And the more they paid attention to it, the stronger it became. Have you ever experienced a moment that changes the way you see everything? Not because the world changed. Because you changed. That was the experience unfolding inside them. For so long they had been searching outside themselves for explanations. Searching for signs. Searching for clarity. Searching for certainty. Yet now certainty seemed to be growing from within. And that realization surprised them more than anything else. Because they finally understood something powerful. The connection was never asking to be forced. It was asking to be understood. The difference is enormous. One creates pressure. The other creates peace. One creates confusion. The other creates clarity. And clarity was beginning to take its place. Wait until the end of this chapter. Because there is a piece of this story that changes everything. As the day unfolded, memories continued appearing. Not random memories. Specific ones. Moments they had nearly forgotten. Words that once seemed ordinary. Experiences that suddenly carried new meaning. And every memory seemed connected by one invisible thread. You. Not in the way they expected. Not in the way movies describe. In a deeper way. A quieter way. A way that felt real. The realization grew stronger. Some people leave an impression. Some leave a lesson. But a rare few leave a transformation. And last night helped them recognize the difference. You may not fully understand this yet. Neither did they. Not at first. But the more they reflected, the clearer it became. The connection had changed them. Not overnight. Not instantly. Gradually. Silently. Over time. Like a river shaping a landscape one drop at a time. And suddenly they began asking themselves a new question. Not, what happened? Not, why now? But, what comes next? That question opened an entirely new chapter. Because the future no longer looked empty. It looked full of possibility. Full of opportunities they had never considered. Full of paths they had never allowed themselves to imagine. And every possibility seemed connected to a single realization. Some stories are not finished when people think they are. Some stories are simply preparing for their next chapter. Before we continue, if this message resonates with you, share your thoughts below. And if you enjoy these journeys of destiny, awareness, and discovery, subscribe so you can continue walking this path with us. Because the story is moving towards something extraordinary. And you do not want to miss what comes next. Now listen carefully. Because this is where the urgency in today's message truly begins to make sense. Your soulmate realized something they wish they had understood sooner. They realized that waiting for a perfect moment often causes people to miss beautiful moments that already exist. They realized that certainty grows through awareness. They realized that some truths become visible only when a person stops running from them. And perhaps most importantly, they realized that the future is built from the choices people make once they become aware. That realization stayed with them. It followed them throughout the day. It returned during unexpected moments. It appeared during quiet pauses. And every time it appeared, the same feeling returned. A feeling that they needed to tell you what happened. A feeling that the realization mattered. A feeling that the story was still unfolding. You might think this is where the mystery ends. It is not. In fact, the most surprising discovery has not arrived yet. Because as the hours passed, another understanding began taking shape. An understanding connected not to the past. Not to last night. Not even to today. But to a future possibility neither of you had fully considered. A possibility that feels closer now than ever before. And when that realization finally reveals itself, you will understand why last night became the moment everything started changing. Because the next chapter is not about what they discovered. It is about what that discovery is leading them toward. And that journey is only beginning.